Bienvenidas. Well, this is really a movable feast, and it seems almost like a travesty to leave the poets behind, but we are doing that as we move to talk to Valeria Souza, who is a decades long, award winning, much recognized biologist specializing in the origins of life, and Ginger Thompson, who's one of the US most outstanding reporters. I'm going to read you a tiny bit about each of them because I know that people often don't go clicking their way through the website, but there's so much more about each of them there. And I've had to condense because I said before, introducing people like this means that you have to either be quiet and just stand in awe or condense madly into a little thumbnail sketch of someone who has done everything in their field. I'll start with Ginger. Ginger Thompson is the chief of correspondence now of ProPublica, which is one of the most extraordinary digital platforms doing long features or long-term investigative coverage in the United States, across the United States. She's won a Pulitzer Prize for journalism. She was the Mexico City bureau chief for 15 years. And I can tell you that her Spanish is fantastic. She has exposed corruption from both sides of the border. She has especially covered issues and policies involving immigration, political upheaval, and the fight against the drug cartels. She's won basically every major prize in journalism, and I can't keep up with her because every time I turn around, there's another one. But I'll just tell you a few of the very well-known: the Maria Moores Cabot Prize, given at Columbia University, the Selden Ring Award, an Inter-American Press Association Award, and an Overseas Press Club Award. And I know I'm about 2 years behind. She was also part of a team of reporters at ProPublica whose coverage of the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy won numerous other awards. And in the spring of 2019, Ginger Thompson broke the story of young children being separated from their parents and held on the US border with Mexico, a story that I don't need to tell you is ongoing. Ginger's been recently guest faculty at New York's Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at City University, and for us, remains an honored member of our faculty because she helped to design under the Volcano's first investigative journalism program in 2018, as has remained a priceless advisor as we continue to build that program out. And some of that group is here today. So behold, Ginger Thompson is back. Valeria Souza is really, I should have said this, an evolutionary biologist, but she will elaborate on that because no matter what label I put on biologist, she'll say, well, yes, but. So we're going to let Valeria explain her work momentarily. She has a lab at UNAM, the University of Mexico City, the main university, Universidad Autónoma de México. Y perdónenme porque he dejado de hablar español, me confundo. It's very hard to speak out of literally both sides of your brain and mouth, pero voy a decirlo de más en español. También da clases, dirige su laboratorio y lleva más de 20 años conduciendo investigación en un lugar que se llama Cuatro Ciénagas. She has been conducting research for more than 20 years in the north of Mexico at Cuatro Ciénagas. Es un sitio único that holds, this unique site holds microscopic forms of life that are continuous, meaning they go back to the very beginnings. And she will tell us also what that means and why it matters. She's had fellowships from everywhere: the MacArthur Foundation, a National Conservation Award, the Aldo Leopold Fellowship awarded by the Woods Institute of Stanford, and in 2019 was named an international member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is, of course, as you all know, a huge honor. Valeria Souza, who's also graciously agreed to speak in English, I should say. Valeria va a hablar en inglés, no se ofendan. Vive entre Mexico City y Tepoztlán and goes as often as she can to her beloved Cuatro Ciénegas. Now, to launch into this unlikely combination, because I don't think biologists so often talk to journalists or vice versa, right? What I want to ask you about is really, what is it that has kept you, well, you could say, Valeria, your eyes into the microscope perhaps, but also digging in the earth for all of these years in Cuatro Ciénegas? Or you, Ginger, what is it that has made investigative journalism the work of your life? And how is that different from ordinary reporting? What does it mean to hold that kind of commitment? What's behind it? So if you would each just briefly address that question, I'll move on after to ask you more specifically about your work.
Ginger? Or
¿No quiere usted primero?
okay, well,
Sí.
that's very gracious. Thank you.
Sí, cómo no.
Since I was a child, when I discovered the structure of DNA at 10 years old, I wanted to understand why and how such an elegant and simple structure holded all the secrets of life. And I was extraordinarily fortunate to have a life where I could dig into that question in 10 years old, so 50 years of scratching. And Cuatro Ciénegas came into me, not me into Cuatro Ciénegas. It's destiny. Behold, NASA knocked the door and said, you have to look at this site. You understand evolution and ecology and microbes, and we need that. And so we arrived to Cuatro Ciénegas, my husband, my two kids, and I in 99. And our life changed totally because the mystery, the beauty, the metaphors, the possibilities, and somehow for me, the rocks are telling me poetry about stardust and comet soups and how we became what we are. And Cuatro Ciénegas is an amazing journey. And I'm very thankful for it.
Wow.
Because it holds the past and the future. We are saving Cuatro Ciénegas through the kids and through consciousness. And that's amazing.
So for me, you know, I became a journalist. I'm an Army brat. I grew up in a family that traveled a lot. And as a child, it was hard, but as an adult, it became a bit of a passion of mine to travel and see the world. And I thought journalism was an opportunity for me to do that, to kind of give me a front seat on history, if you will. But early in my career, I had an experience where I was able to write about a woman who was being wrongly accused of a crime. And I was able to sort of write about the fact that she was being wrongly accused. I investigated the crime. She let me into her life. She was a very poor single mother who was terrified of speaking to a journalist. It took me a long time to win her trust. And when I did, and I was able to sort of write about what had happened from her point of view, it got the crime, or got the accusations against her lifted. And that moment and that very first early story changed me. And I saw that journalism was a way to give power to people who didn't have it. And so I've done a lot of different jobs in my career. I was a Mexico City correspondent for many years for the New York Times. But I've always looked for opportunities to use my journalism to empower people who are otherwise, not heard, powerless in front of institutions or systems that are causing them harm. And so investigative journalism, it has been my way of doing that. And that's why this kind of reporting, which isn't all that different than what you would call regular reporting, it just, with investigative reporting, you're often allowed to stick with a story for a longer period of time, to spend more time looking for facts and information that exposes harm. And so, I'm following in trails that were blazed by women like Elena Poniatowska, whom I'm so proud to be here and to have been able to listen to her. And I just want to say that.
Thank you. I hope
Thank
you
you,
can hear
Ginger.
me.
I wonder if we go back to Valeria and take up this thread that Ginger just mentioned about the story of the story and how realizing that what you do has the power to carry out into the world stories that wouldn't otherwise be told and even to bring about change. Because the little that I've seen of Cuatro Ciénagas, I haven't yet been lucky enough to go there. It seems to me that what you see there is a very, very big story. Can you tell us a little more about what's there? Because I hear rocks, I hear stardust, and so I realized that you're reaching from deep into the earth and that the story goes to the sky, which we'll be looking at tomorrow when we're visited by Priya Nataranjan, the astrophysicist, talking about black holes. So I love the scope of what you're suggesting, but I would like to hear what you have to say about that and why you're still digging.
So I don't know if I can share my screen and give you a very fast story.
We
Let's,
hope so. You should be able to. And
yes.
if you can't, we'll make it happen. Ahí va.
Now here it is. So Cuatro Ciénegas is an amazing, beautiful place. It's a place where mountains lift off and bend and form heart shapes, like 3,000-meter high. And we arrived there because NASA was interested in Cuatro Ciénegas being the most diverse place for stromatolites, and stromatolites are rocks, striped rocks, but they are the oldest fossils that we know on Earth. And they are the oldest communities. And so Cuatro Ciénegas, they are alive and kicking, and they are very diverse. And not only that, they are the food of all kinds of animals. And that's unique in most of the world. And so what I have discovered in 20 years of working in Cuatro Ciénegas, here's the view of this amazing mountain called San Marcos y Pinos. It looks like a starship, and or the nose of a huge dinosaur. And it has stored in its belly the story of life on Earth, in its inside sediments, in the inside rocks. And the reason why we can tell it is because it has fire in the belly, deep down. So how we know those things? We know because we can see the stromatolites. They make the reefs of the past, but also the reefs in the present. And here, in between my fingers, we have the history of life on Earth. And that's quite humbling because in the deepest layer, we have the first metabolism on Earth. That's the metanogens. That is a very, very simple metabolism. Then we have all kind of sulfur using molecules that build life for a hot planet. And then the miracle of photosynthesis. The early photosynthesis was purple and deep green and didn't broke water because it was low energy, low frequency, and the ancient bacteria hide in the water, in the orange ocean, because UV light was not stopped by ozone layer. And then these filaments, very thin filaments, are the cyanobacteria, the ones that discover how to break the water in order to free the oxygen, and bubble by bubble change the planet forever. So we are here thanks to these small slice of mud cake. And then a little grass and my fingers tell the rest of the story. Here we are. Here we are thanks to these little creatures that change the metabolic signature of all Earth, even if they are minuscule. And the reason why Cuatro Ciénegas stored is this magma that is in the belly of the mountain, and probably is an anomaly deep on Earth. I like to think that is kind of the cradle of early life. And we know it's an anomaly because with the molecular signature of the creatures we find in Cuatro Ciénegas, we can go all the way back. In this case, it's aerobic bacillus, and they need oxygen. So we cannot go further than when the ocean turned blue, and it turned blue 600 million years ago because the animals make holes. And when the animals were greedy and want to have more food and start to dig holes, they released the nutrients that were beneath the marine sediment, and then the algae went up. And all that was caused by the stromatolites causing a global freezing that liberates the phosphorus that was stored in the rocks. So all those stories of animals, of creatures, of rocks and ice are hidden behind it, inside this mountain. And we think is kind of the treasure cove. Life was molded along with the mountain when it uplifted in the Cretaceous. And clay and slate mold together and make these little tiny caves where the minerals and the bacteria and microbes stay. And so when the heat takes them up, they have a sun life, and then water drips down and refills the wetland. And they have a mountain life. Most of their times it's a mountain slow life. Nobody cares. They are slowly evolving. There's no way to stop evolution. But we are draining the wetland. We are killing the time machine because we're greedy, and this is beautiful place, Turinsa, is now dead. Cadavers everywhere. But we have hope, because if we stop hoping, we will stop living. And the hope is the children. And we've been working 20 years with the young children to raise consciousness through art. And then with the high schoolers to raise consciousness to the power of science. And they are the owners of the genetic resources of their land. And they are transforming the way everybody sees the land, because they're explaining the elders how to use the water in the desert and how to use it wisely for them to have a life. And I'm so proud that a river was reborn in October last year, because these kids took the power of their action to stop a channel to drain their land and retake the river to wet the wetland. And now it's 40 hectares long, 7 kilometers long. And it's a miracle of the transformation of the power of consciousness and education. And here this kid, who is now an adult, was wide-eyed 14-year-old when he saw his first stromatolite, and now he's a PhD in biotechnology, and he's the leader of the project of biotechnology for the people in Cuatro Ciénegas. So there's a lot of hope. We can transform the world one side at a time, as the stromatolites build it bubble by bubble. We have a blue planet.
Valeria, a simple question here, and then we'll turn to Ginger, because this is a great example of a story worth pursuing. Are you saying, in effect, that this site is a unique laboratory and that there is continuous life inside it? Yes. And from what I understood, you had to do a huge campaign to protect it and preserve it. Is that correct?
Lion, yes.
So the research has gone hand in hand with political action and education altogether.
Yes,
that's
there's
right.
no way to slice one from the other, because we are part of this politica persona. And the scientist in me needs to communicate in order to explain why do I care.
Exactly.
It's
So,
not, so
is there anything, Valeria, anything that in all of these years, if you could say one sentence, anything that has surprised you and your team that you discovered that you didn't know about these proto forms of life?
Well, when we arrived to Cuatro Ciénegas in '99, the naturalist who discovered Cuatro Ciénegas, Dr. Minkley, was the one who dragged NASA there, because he believed the ocean was there once upon a time and that survived. And we didn't believe him. And when we saw the first molecular evidence of the ocean being there, and not since the Jurassic, but since the Precambrian, it was a wow moment. He was right.
So this is why you're still there,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Okay. I don't want to cut you off, but I would just like to come back to Ginger. Would you say anything about sort of your current work, where you put the energy, where do you feel, what are the stories? Everything seems to be ramifying so much, and we're in a state of, multiple traumas in the US and in Mexico. How does one choose, and how do you personally choose what you're going to write about next?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I am currently working on stories that are incredibly new to me, subjects that are incredibly new to me. I think, once we entered this pandemic last year, all of ProPublica pretty much turned its attention to writing about the pandemic. And so have I. And I began sort of following an outbreak in one particular place. There's this town in southern Georgia called Albany, Georgia. And for a time there, it had the fourth highest number of cases in the world. And it's this tiny town, tiny as 75,000 people in southwest Georgia. And it is a largely African-American town. And if you all were watching the pandemic unfold in the United States, there were sort of different waves of understanding of the pandemic. And the first wave was that we were getting hit. The second wave was that some of us were getting hit harder than others. And those some of us were people of color, including African Americans. And so then the next question we began asking at ProPublica is why? Why are African Americans and people of color being so disproportionately affected by the pandemic? And so I was sort of asking those questions as I was watching virtually, because I wasn't able to travel to Albany right away. And so I would sign into Facebook pages. The city was holding public hearings about the pandemic online. I could actually kind of be a sort of fly on the wall and watch a lot of events that were unfolding in Albany online. So it was a hotspot for the pandemic. It was a place where this question of African Americans and being disproportionately affected was sort of playing out. Those questions were playing out. And one of the things that began to sort of get talked about in terms of the impact on African Americans is that they suffer high rates of what we now call comorbidities, high rates of hypertension, high rates of diabetes, high rates of a lot of very preventable illnesses and conditions. And so then we said, okay, why are they doing that? Why is it that Black people in this country are so sick? And the questions inevitably were answered in the healthcare system, right? And the disparities in how African American communities are served or ill-served by the healthcare system. And in Albany, Georgia, there is one hospital, and it dominates the healthcare system in this very, remote corner of Southwest Georgia. It is one of the poorest congressional districts in the country and has one of the most powerful healthcare systems in the country. And I'm thinking, how can a place with such a powerful healthcare system have such a sick population? And, that question on its own was very compelling to me. And then you just do a little bit of history, looking at the history of Albany, and it sealed my interest in that. Albany, Georgia was this place where at the turn of the century, in 1898 and 1900, W.E.B. Du Bois traveled there to write about and study the conditions of African American life in America. And that's where he wrote 2 chapters of his, epic book, The Souls of Black Folk. And so feeling like I was going to possibly be following in some of his footsteps, writing about the founder of the hospital, the man who paid to found the hospital, to establish the hospital that I'm writing about, met W.E.B. Du Bois. And this hospital was founded at about that same time. So this story is very rich with history. And it asks this question, which I think is a very central question in this country at this time, and allows us to, in one place, with one healthcare system and one community of people, really try to tell the story of race, tell the story of the healthcare system, tell the story of disparities in treatment, and just sort of, I don't know, I'm speaking too much, but basically, that has been sort of that's been the focus of my investigation over the last year. So I'm hoping to write a story. We're doing a film connected to this piece, and hopefully it will all come out sometime later this year. No te escucho. You know.
It's such an incredible example of what investigative journalism can do, which requires the resources to put a team in place, to go back, to have the luxury of time. And of course, what you're describing is taking a place as a kind of laboratory, but seeing it that way. I mean, it has to be seen first to be taken that way, right? And then you have it opening out. And that's not to make unequal comparisons, but it does feel a bit analogous to what Valeria was describing with Cuatro Ciénegas.
Absolutely.
You go where there is a story, and the two of you go where the story is big and interesting, and has implications sort of outside its own perimeter in a way. Isn't that true?
Yeah, it's resonant. We look for things that are resonant, you know. So Albany is a story in which we hope we'll be able to show it's representative of what's going on in the healthcare system across the country, right? And so very much like Valeria's work in Cuatro Ciénegas, you know, it's this place where you can tell the story of the world, but in one place.
This is the best kind of ambition. I hate to cut you off, but we would like to give a moment or two for questions or comments. The audience has been extremely excited all through this conversation today. And what I'm picking up is a sense of fascination, and that they're taking away a notion someone has called here radical curiosity, which seems like a great way for us to leave this. There's so many more questions. I think we're at the edge, the outer edge of our allotted time, but I will ask the hidden puppeteers whether we can stay on a little longer if people would like that. Can we? Send me a message.
Sure.
They have spoken. So in that case, in that case, I am checking the list of questions here. People are curious about the political action that you organized in Cuatro Ciénegas. Valeria, if you want to say anything briefly again, given especially this person is asking the anti-science climate that is prevailing in the US at the moment. Of course, this was
in Mexico, there's not such an anti-science as US. We are very different, as Elena explained. We are from a different branch, probably. But there's a problem with the government, that the woman who is in charge of the science in Mexico, I know her since college, we studied together. She has her own agenda and not the agenda of everybody. And her agenda is she's blessed by some kind of illumination, and the rest of us, we are just privileged brats who want our money for buying the newest machine, which is not true. We do science with masking tape, literally. And nevertheless, we publish in the best journals. And it's a feat of faith that we work with amazing students. UNAM is an amazing house that shelters us all. And we work where we have, but instead of Elena protecting science in Mexico, as she is a scientist and she's a top scientist, she's only protecting herself. And that's very selfish. And the scientific community resent that. But the fact, as Elena showed, that thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were vaccinated in the last month because we have faith in science. There's much fewer anti-vaxxers in Mexico. They're just the hipsters or the ones who don't understand that there is in United States. But I think we scientists, we need a voice clear and loud to explain what we do and why we do it. And for me, Cuatro Ciénegas has been an example of how to raise that voice for the social justice and the future of those kids.
So you have been a science advocate, really.
Yes.
I know you've also written a lot and you believe in sort of getting the story out. We're going to do a journalism workshop in January, specifically focused on reporting science, because it's clear this is not a genre, this is an emergency.
It is.
There is just a crying, urgent need for people to understand the importance of science and the scientific method, as well as to be literate in what is now happening to all of us. I mean, we're walking around and we notice that we've become a human petri dish. And maybe we always were, but we didn't know it until Corona came along. So,
yeah. And I have learned that the world hypothesis that is very natural to scientists is very finicky in people that don't understand science. So are you telling me this is true, or just you think it's true? And that's the basic point that we need to reinforce.
I want to read out another question that's specifically for Ginger from one of our participants this year, who says, and I know you've heard this before, it's a bit challenging to get pitches accepted these days for investigative pieces. Many outlets stick to their usual contributors, and it's rather difficult for upcoming journalists to get their foot in the door. Any tips? For example, he says, when there are good topics, such as Cuatro Ciénegas.
So, you know, I think pitching is one of the most complicated things we do, and I think what's really important is right off the top, you need to try to communicate to whoever you're pitching to that you're going to tell them something they don't know, that you're going to reveal something that the public doesn't know well, or they don't know it the way that you're going to tell it, right? You know, when I wrote about a cartel massacre in Mexico, in Allende, right? I wanted people to know right away that they were going to read a story in a way they've never read about cartel violence in Mexico. Unfortunately, we all know cartel violence in Mexico happens way too often and has taken far too many lives. But this attack in Mexico was different, and I was going to write about it in a different way, and I wanted my readers to know from the moment they started reading this that it was going to be something different, and that they were going to learn something different about what drives the violence in Mexico, that it's not just cartels, that there are governments involved, including the United States government was involved in triggering that massacre. And so when I pitched it to my editors, I pitched it by saying, you don't know how deeply involved the United States government is in triggering cartel violence in Mexico. That we kind of knew it in the abstract, but I had an example, and I was going to be able to bring to life an example of what that looked like. And we were going to tell it in an oral history where I was not going to narrate the story. I was going to report this story in a way that the people who had experienced this violence and who had contributed to triggering the violence were going to tell the story. And that was not anything, no one has done really in, since Elena probably, investigative oral histories. And so I think it's really important because it's incredibly competitive right now. You need to tell an editor immediately, you don't know this, or you don't know it in the way that I'm going to tell it. This is going to be new to you and your readers. That cuts through a lot of the sort of, denial. Make clear in the first paragraph that this is new, that this is different.
Everyone today, from the poets to Elena to Carolyn and to Valeria and Ginger, has talked in each their own way about revelation, about revealing something, and about realizing as a researcher, as a writer, as a poet, as a journalist, that you have the power to bring something over. And I couldn't have asked for anything more inspiring. There are more questions than we have time for, and we will bring you back when we're live in Tepoztlan and can take this whole thing forward, because this is an amazing group to be talking with and speculating with and looking ahead with. And 6 months from now, we'll know a little more than we do today about where some of this is heading, but not everything. So have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are. And thank you so much to our fantastic hidden crew, Hector Massin and Ricardo Morales. And Gabi, if you're here, please come back and say hello and goodbye in Spanish.
I am here. I am thrilled to share. I'm going to say this in Spanish. Estoy muy conmovida y muy agradecida de ver esta muestra justamente de cómo la ciencia, la poesía, el conocimiento, el activismo se entrelazan para construir otra clase de mundo. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Gracias por participar con sus excelentes preguntas y efectivamente nos vemos mañana en esta conversación que tendrá como eje un poco de lo que vimos hoy también, la imaginación, la ciencia y la especulación en torno a esta forma de abordar el mundo a partir de estas epistemologías. Muchas gracias y nos vemos mañana a la misma hora a las 12.